Welcome to Light Talks. We're here at the Sony Media Center. Yeah, thanks everybody for joining in. I know it's a little bit difficult having you on a screen. We're sitting here alone in the room. We're going to do our best that we all feel comfortable, and we got a chance to really learn something about lighting. Yeah, so thanks, Nicole, for doing this. I mean, to share what we're going to talk about exterior lighting, right? Which is a topic that everybody faces no matter what the budget.
Right.
That's a really cool thing to do.
Yeah.
But I was thinking, everybody, before we geek out, I was just talking that we talk a little bit about your background and stuff. So I was wondering, because you worked as a still photographer, has the still photography in any way influenced the way you work as a cinematographer? Something been able that can you reference back to and stuff?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, for sure, obviously starting off in stills, and it's one of the reasons also that I was interested in talking about exterior lighting today, because it's something that, in stills and in cinematography and moving images that I find to be one of the hardest things to deal with in terms of being able to control light. And as a photographer, when I started off, I was really mostly doing available light photography or finding light in different scenarios and using it without actually creating my own lighting setups for many reasons. Obviously, I was 13 years old, so I didn't have the tools to work with that I would have now. So I would just find, beautiful churches or different types of bridges and things like that, and try to find the contrast and the light that way. And
so with 13, you're already doing scouts of locations and figuring out?
No, I was in I was in high school, and I was at a really amazing high school, and we got to pick a major. So my major was photography, and my English teacher also taught us film at the same time. So I had a lot of exposure to film and photography when I was younger. So
was there a time where you had the feeling where, or can you remember actually a time where you say that was the time you really discovered lighting for yourself, that is something that's really important?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely say when my English teacher, Jim Hosny, started showing me films that were from Germany, from France, Italy, that was really the first time that I felt a connection to film that made me feel like it was something that I wanted to do in terms of the type of photography that I was doing in the same kind of lighting sphere. I think that's probably the best way to describe it.
Can you talk about what lighting sphere, what do you mean with that?
And I hate to say European in terms of the aesthetic, but it was definitely the types of films that were being made in the United States were very different than the types of films that were being made in Europe. And so once I started getting introduced to European film, I felt more of a connection to those filmmakers, and it made me want to get into cinematography, move out of photography, and start working more with moving images.
Oh, wow.
So
I mean, I'm just trying to second guess, but basically the American movies always had more budgets, and the Europeans trying to wing it with available light and kind of see what's possible.
Yeah, it's so hard to put a finger on it. It was just something sort of innate that I just reacted to when I saw the films that were being made overseas. A lot of the film in the United States at that time was more realism, I think, as well. So the surrealism of the films that were being made in some of the other countries just is what drew me into filmmaking.
Do you have some examples of movies?
Oh, well, it was Bertolucci and Antonioni, and films like Red Desert, Conformist, Passenger, and then some German filmmakers like Fassbinder and Wenders, and just American Friend, Berlin Alexanderplatz, just all these films. They were so different than anything that I'd ever seen that had come out of the United States, and so they just blew my mind, and I went to film school, and here we are.
Wow. So let's jump in time, and now we're suddenly we're out of the film world and with the digital world. Have you seen for yourself a difference in saying like lighting for digital, or is there something where you had the feeling you had to adapt to that? Or was
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, we obviously started off shooting film in photography and in movies and television and commercials. I mostly was working in commercials when digital came out, and just in terms of really the most important thing that I discovered was protecting for the highlights and protecting for the toe, for the blacks. Whereas with film, there was a little bit more wiggle room in terms of the freedom of maybe pointing the camera at something that in digital, because also you can see it right away. You have that immediate, satisfaction. You can be much more precise with digital in that respect, but it also took away some of that sort of surprise, I guess is the best way to say, that we used to have when we shot film.
Yeah.
You'd go and you'd shoot something, then you'd go into the telecine the next morning at 5 o'clock in the morning or 6 o'clock in the morning, and it was like magic that you didn't know exactly what it was ever going to be, which I loved. But there's also something wonderful about being able to control the image in digital as well. So
Do you still use a light mirror when you're working?
I don't, no, not in
Yeah.
digital, not
Yeah.
not really very much. On occasion, maybe possibly if we go into a location that I would need one, but it's pretty rare, pretty rare.
And so I guess you don't operate? You have operators working for you?
On
or-
television
Yeah.
shows, yes, 100%. I have
Yeah.
operators. It's there's too much going on, and it's really important for me to really focus on the lighting. And then I have, you know, amazing camera operators who interface with the directors, so I can go and work with my gaffer and my grip and really get things.
How do you
going.
physically set this up? Like working, because I always found that if you have a DP at a monitor, you always, I'm running back and forth all the time.
Yeah.
But how do you kind of handle that? Like being on set, being at the monitor, still keeping in control of everything that's going on?
Yeah.
That you don't get locked up in a box? No?
Yeah, no, that's definitely, that was a tricky thing at first because you definitely want to be on set and you want to have that connection also to the actors and designing the shots as well. So I just try to do as much in prep, as much in advance as possible so that I'm not off set. So then I can be on set with my camera operators, my director, and then as soon as I feel like they're settled, then I step off and let them have the set. And especially, I mean, obviously during COVID, we were trying to keep the numbers down. So it was really helpful to have camera operators that knew what I wanted to do and that they could, you know, basically like create my vision without me having to stand there all the time. But as you know, as a gaffer, you do have to go on set because you'll see things and you can't see them when you're not on set. So you have to go on there and look for light leaks and look for things that you wouldn't be able to see from the monitor. So I do both. Like you said, we run around a lot. I feel like I'm getting more exercise than when I was operating sometimes. So yeah.
And prepping for the lighting, you do the LUTs ahead of time because you said something interesting I hadn't heard before. Is lighting for LUT. So can you talk a little
Lighting
bit
to
about
the
that?
LUT. Yeah.
Or
So before I start any show or film, basically I'll come up with a lookbook of images that I'll share with producers, director, production designers. And we sort of come up with a look together. And then with my DIT, I'll create a LUT. And it's, you know, there's always some wiggle room, like we'll adjust things on the day as well, but it's basically a show LUT. And so when we do the live color while we're shooting, you can actually light to that LUT, which is specific. It might be, you know, it might have hotter highlights or deeper blacks that if you were just lighting to either Rec 709 or negative, you wouldn't be able to see those subtleties. And then that way, usually when you are finished and you go into the DI, you are pretty much one-to-one. Like it's very rare that it's really very much that you have to do. So it also helps the process in terms of not having to do as much in post. And it's your vision as opposed to it being, you know, something that gets taken over.
Yeah. So. In the process between, you know, doing the lights afterwards, because the people are going to be editing it, right? That's something for you too, where you kind of look out for what the people are going to see for a long time when they're editing it.
Yeah.
That's kind of is consistent.
Yeah. I mean, we sort of talked about that the other day. It was in terms of, you know, that you want people to get used to what you had originally intended for the show or the film to look like. So I find it's really, really important. You know, and even if you can't have a DIT, you can still create a look. And, you know, that way it goes to the offline and everybody falls in love with the look and, you know, keeps it in the way that I've wanted it to be from the beginning.
So we're moving outside now, right? And we're thinking about, you know, shooting outside and you're within the weathers and all the situations you are. What do you look out for lighting? What's important for you? Like, when's the point where you say, okay, let's shoot, I'm ready? Do you have stuff you go to where you say, I like that, and why?
Well, I mean, since we're talking about shooting exteriors mostly in this class, it's really for me, I mean, the beginning starts with the scouting, of course, having an amazing location scout who knows to look for locations that are facing the right direction or have different alternatives for, you know, if you're going to be there for a whole day, because obviously, unless you're shooting in the morning and only in the afternoon, you're always going to have a certain time of day where you have to struggle with high sun or just things not being lit the way you want them to with the natural light. So the location scouting first, then obviously working with the assistant director to time out the days so that they have timed out the day so it works so you can utilize the light the best that you can, as opposed to having to constantly like chase the light or get rid of it or fix it, because it just takes such a long time if you're not facing in the right direction. But if you're facing in the right direction, whether it's cross-lit or backlit, you really can work quickly and it's always more beautiful. So
Mm. And you get into situations where you can't control it anyway. There's wind coming up and stuff. I mean, actually,
Yeah.
it's a good cue, huh? Maybe we
Yeah.
should jump into
Yeah,
your
yeah.
work on Jupiter's Legacy, huh? That's
Yeah,
what you
that'd be
start
great.
out
Yeah,
with.
so basically, so we pulled some stills from the show behind the scenes that I'd love to show first. The first scene is a scene that we did. It's supposed to be Kansas during the Dust Bowl. So basically, we had a giant 40 by overhead, which originally was supposed to be stretched over the entire street, which is what you would normally have on a back lot. But because we were shooting actually on location and there were certain parameters and there was weather issues, we couldn't actually silk the entire street.
Mm.
So this was our sort of alternative. It was a little too small, but we figured we would move it around. It was on a crane. We could adjust it, move it to the left, to the right. And then we got there on the day. You can see if you go to the second and the third slide. So the second slide, you can see it's not there anymore. We had to take it down. The third slide, it was pouring rain. This was all within an hour. And then by the fourth slide, so then this was our first shot that we were able to do. Originally, we had green screens that covered the entire street. It's hard to tell, but because of the wind, we ended up having to put up a 12 by, or sorry, I think that was a 20 by. Can't remember now. And that was all we could do. So that basically, at least the talent was in front of the green screen. So then the VFX department could paint everything else out around him. Because as you can see past the green screen, further down, it obviously doesn't look like Kansas because it's Toronto, Canada, and it's green and it's winter.
But you had overcast day, right? So actually that helped you in that instance.
It was overcast at this point.
Yeah.
So we had 4 cameras set up. We would jump to this and then we would jump back. When the sun came out, we'd jump back down. They would try to bring the overhead over. But then when it started to rain and it got windy and then we had lightning, obviously we had to take everything down. So at the end of the day, this was just one of the scenarios that I kind of wanted to talk about, is being able to adapt to the different scenarios when you're on location, and how, to me, that's the hardest thing to do as a cinematographer, because you have this beautiful idea in your mind and you get there and it's completely different. You have to throw it all away. You have to think on your feet. You have to think of, what am I going to do? And luckily on these bigger shows, I have a VFX supervisor with me. I have a lot of crew, so we can adapt quickly. Yeah. But at the end of the day, I had all this equipment and we're pretty much shooting available light. Yeah. And then they fixed it in post. So. But
is that something where you just kind of got behind? You just had to try to keep continuity going?
That's the difficult part. Yeah, is keeping the continuity. So we, obviously in the wide shots, it's more difficult when the sun would come out, but in the tighter shots, we could light them and, bring in larger rags and things like that from the ground that were fine. So if we go to the next still, I just have a couple, you can go through them. Just, you can see, like, this is a more sort of contained environment where we have a silk overhead. And then this was actually available light. And then we just brought in neg. And then this was with the giant silk overhead. So we pushed it to the side of the street. So this was when it was sunny.
I don't know for the audience out there how many are really familiar already with that kind of setups. I was just thinking maybe to talk a little bit about how you plan wide shots and how you plan close-ups, just in terms of what you want to cover and what, so you're safe during the day, especially if you got know weather's going to be changing.
Right. So, I mean, obviously we check the weather the best we can, but most of the time it doesn't usually work out the way we want it to. So, most of the time we'll try to get the wide shot, if we're in the right direction, done in the morning. On this particular location, we had a wide shot from one end of the street and we had another wide shot from the other end. So we did one in the morning facing east and one in the afternoon facing west. Basically kind of flipped around as the day went on, going east, south to west, so we could utilize as much as we could the natural sun. Yeah.
Is that something in prepping, because I immediately have the feeling directors or actors could say it's cutting up the scene in a weird way? How do you kind of tone that in? So
yeah. I mean, it depends on the director and it depends on, the show that you're on. Sometimes it doesn't work that way. And we do have to stay in one direction. Then we do have to deal with the elements and we just have to light them. Some directors are comfortable to cut it up, especially if it's a wide shot at the very end, as long as it's not a wide master. If it's just for a beat or something like that, then they're usually pretty comfortable with it. But otherwise, yes, you are totally right that you have to be prepared that we're going to be shooting all in the same direction, sun out, sun gone, wind, rain. which I told you I just came from Ireland, and we would have that all within an hour. So
Yeah.
on that shoot.
Is it something ahead of time, just especially with the politics or for yourself to get where you need to go to get the images? Is that they leave time, or did you suggest that people do like complete rehearsals so everybody knows what's happening? Or
Yeah.
how is it, how do you how is that set up usually?
I mean, like on, any normal day, obviously we'll rehearse the entire scene. And then, but it's beforehand that I would have the discussion with the director that, listen, you're going to have more time with your actors if we shoot this way, as opposed to if you try to fix it in the middle of the scene, because it might take me an hour to get all the overheads over. But if we shoot in the right direction, you can shoot in 5 minutes.
Okay.
So it's just a conversation we have. And I really like working with directors who are open to that, because it makes my job so much easier. And I just really think it's important to give the actors the time that they need, and not to be waiting for grip and electric all the time. So
yeah, that totally makes sense.
In exteriors for sure. I mean, in exteriors,
obviously,
everyone's out in the elements, and they're all dealing with it, especially if it's either hot or, I mean, on this show we were there from summer till winter, so we dealt with too much sun and too much snow, and all kinds of things. So and after 6 months, you're also really good friends with the actors, so a lot of times they'll just be like, what do you need? They'll like ask me, which is great.
Cool.
So
Cool. Awesome. Let's hop ahead, huh? We got some other great
so
stuff to look
I have
at.
basically just this scene that I just showed you the stills from. I actually have a clip of it, so we could show you the clip, and then you can see what the visual effects department did. I thought they did a beautiful job. So, and I can talk a little bit about it while we're showing it. But basically, obviously, it'll starts with a close up, and again, like Jacob was saying, we start the ultimate dream is that you start with the wide shots, and then you get smaller and tighter. But in this situation, we had to jump to tighter pieces and then jump back to wider pieces. And so is it just stepping on our end, do you think? Or yeah, okay. So so you can just kind of see basically from the stills that I showed you how they were able to make it feel consistent in terms of the lighting. And then at the very end of this, actually, I left a little tiny piece where he goes inside of this one business. And just so you could see on the same location, normally we would have gone on stage, but because of various reasons up in Canada, they were limited on stages. So we ended up just going inside, even though it was nighttime. So once he goes inside the cafe, it's completely dark outside. And then we did have to light for this, and we had to do it all in one day.
Wow.
Get out of there. And when we went inside, it was pouring rain again. So it was really hard, and just trying to get lights out set up in the pouring rain. And
how many minutes do you actually have to shoot per day on such a show?
On this, we were mostly 12-hour days. Yeah, but some of these days were a little bit shorter.
I mean, how much in terms of final film?
Actual shooting time on set?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's hard to say.
Okay.
It's so different
I
every
just
day.
mean it's like 1 or 2 minutes. That's where you're going to end up in the final film.
Oh, like this piece?
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is probably more like, I think, probably 10. Yeah, it was quite a big scene. Wow. Yeah. I mean, this section was in one day, then we came back and did another section another day. So
okay.
So anyway, so that was one piece in Kansas, and then if we go back to the stills, there was just another scenario where, again, we really wanted to be on stage. But because there was no stage space available, we ended up going to a quarry it was like, they don't call it upstate, but North Ontario, so outside of Toronto. So they had to bring the entire crew. And basically you can see from the first still, we're just in the middle of nowhere. There's really nothing. They just put up some telephone poles, and you can see the little tiny 4x flag up there and the little tiny green screen. This was supposed to be a giant wall of green. And even though you can't tell because it looks nice and calm, the wind was so strong that day that we ended up having to pull everything down and put up small little tiny 4x. And in the next picture you can see, I think, basically we had the crew standing on them, so that we called them our human sandbags, so they wouldn't flip over onto the actor. And then if you go to the next one, just basically to kind of show, so that we could have the green screen behind the actor at all times. You can see some of the guys still standing back there. Just basically everybody had to hold on to a 4x. It was that windy, otherwise they were going to hurt somebody. And then you can keep going. I think there's a couple more, and then I'll show you the clip from this one as well. So basically, yeah. So this would have been this is an extension. You'll see when you see the final footage, because obviously in the Dust Bowl, there's not supposed to be any trees. So that was all painted out.
Yeah. I mean, what changes for you? And that's a little bit of a stupid question. What changes for you when you have to go to smaller sizes from the big ones in
Right.
terms of lighting? What do you have to do?
Yeah. So basically not having the bigger rags and having the smaller rags is you see the separation between the different frames. So you're not able to cover as big of an area. So when you start putting multiple ones together, it's harder to sort of skinny up those cracks that you'll have. And then also just you can't get as much height. You can do the width, but you can't get the height because it's hard to stack them on top of each other. So, and then, you start to see the stands in the shots as well, of course. So when I would, normally those would have been 40 buys just that were basically those floating green screens that you can set up. But because we couldn't do that, you can see the stands. So then VFX then has to roto everything. So basically in this scenario, by not being on stage, it actually ended up costing them a lot of money. Whereas if the stage space had been available, we would have just thrown some dirt down on the ground, been on a green screen stage, and they would have been able to do the same work. And I could have lit it consistently as opposed to also chasing the sun and the overcast and all of that.
Do you change your shots when something like that happens? Do you go tighter? Do you do compromises, or you?
Not really, no.
That's good.
I had an amazing visual effects team on this show, so I had total confidence in them that they were going to do a beautiful job. And when you see the clip, you can cue up the clip. It's the Jupiter's Legacy 2. I mean, just the job that they did in terms of set extension, and it was even better than I thought it would be, because literally every other shot was either in sun or in shade, and I did the best I could to shape it and make it look good. But it was, again, why I wanted to talk about this. I find it to be one of the things that you don't want to compromise ever, but you also do have to have respect and trust in the other people that you're working with, that hopefully they're going to finish it the way that you imagined it to be. So this was, again, this was just one of those scenarios where I did. So yeah, I mean, they even painted in clouds.
These were painted in those clouds.
Yeah,
wow.
They did a lot of work to make it really feel like it was not in Canada.
So scenes like that, do you bring in the big HMIs only when the sun leaves away?
Yeah, one of the things, another thing about this location, even though you can't tell, it had rained the day before. So all of our telehandlers with our big lights couldn't make it up the hill to the quarry. So one of the days I had one up there that got stuck there, so I could use it. But the other days they actually couldn't make it up the hill. So we basically did the best that we could with some smaller units. And then when the sun would come out, we'd try to use the sun, but again, trying to match it, because when the sun's out, obviously you have a rim, you have some highlights, and then when it was gone, you have nothing, and you can't put that in later. That's baked in. So, we just tried to match it as best as we could in the grade.
Yeah. When you set up lights, because the sun's going to be coming out later.
Yeah.
Or it's leaving and putting it up. Are you positioning the lights always exactly where the sun was, or are you kind of playing around from there?
A lot of times in this kind of a situation, it's more to fill. So it would be through something. And then if we were using it as a backlight, like when the sun went away, yes, in a normal situation, we would then drive it around to the back. This was a little bit more difficult in terms of the fact that the wide shots were so wide. And once this one telehandler got stuck, they had to paint it out in every single shot. Really? You can't see it there, but so we didn't bring any more up. So I basically just kind of had to go with it. Yeah. And, I'm like I said, I was really happy with the result, but it was difficult, and it took a long time, and it would have been really easy to do on stage.
Yeah. So basically, even with no sun, you're filling from the front. That's what basically you do outside.
No, actually,
basically in this show,
it was just if the sun was too bright that I would try to balance. Yeah. Yeah. Right. So once if they were beautifully backlit, I would just expose for the sun. If we needed a kiss of fill on a close-up or something like that, then I would do it. But for the wide shots, they were pretty much.
Do you ever use big bounce boards like 12 bys, 20 bys?
Yes. Yeah. Ultra bounce and things like that. And I've used your diffusion as well. Your diffusion reflectors, which are amazing. And I can't wait to use them on my next show.
Do you use different colors in bouncing? Is that something you do like outside, like the checkerboards that we had in the?
You know, mostly, you know, it'll either be gold or silver or white, sometimes some day gray. I know we don't have a lot of charcoal here, but I've used it overseas. So I'll give you guys just a little preface to this. So again, normally when you would shoot something like this next setup, which is another scene from Jupiter's Legacy, we would normally shoot this on stage. I have this funny picture of me standing in the middle of this giant green screen setup. You can see in the background, there's a 200K soft sun up on the right side. There's probably about 200 feet of green screen. And then we had a giant overhead to the left, which we used when it got to be too dark at night so that you could actually fake sky overhead. And then on the other side of me, which you can't see, we had a bank of probably 8 different 9 lights that were on cranes and other green screens on cranes so that we could move them around so we could flip around. And we had to face the other direction.
What do you use the 9 lights for?
The 9 lights for, we were actually, there was a giant blast that was coming from the island. So we had to simulate that there was a big blast of light. So we did a light gag with those at night. And then the next still, it's hard to see, but there is actually a boat back there. It's just kind of hidden. This is just sort of another vantage point over the top of the boat where we had the overhead that we could move over when we needed it. Lots of tracking marks on the boat. Obviously they created the hull later in post. So anyway, this was in a parking lot. If anybody knows Hamilton, Ontario, it's up in the north as well. And they basically built this in a parking lot for about 3 months. It was on a gimbal, so it could rock with water cannons and some different platforms with cranes. And the very first day, it poured and the whole thing got flooded. So it was really, really challenging, and dealing with the weather and then also dealing with it going from day into night because it was winter time by then. So we only had about 7 hours of daylight, but we had to shoot for 10 or 12. So, and then I think there's one more still. It just sort of shows what it was like up on the boat. So this is as it's starting to get dark. You can see as we start to get into dusk. And then we'll show the clip. And you can see all the work that was done. But in terms of, again, trying to keep continuity with the sun going in and going out and creating the sun and becoming night and becoming day, this would have been, and because we weren't in the water, giant overhead and 2 giant rags on the side so that you can bounce so that you actually feel like it's the real sky. And one of the things, that we were talking about earlier is just when you're in nature and the things that happen naturally from light that sometimes you can't get that to happen on stage. Things are bouncing off of the ground or bouncing off of the sky or coming from the sky, or, there might be a dapple from a tree. And those kinds of things are hard to actually create sometimes after the fact. So on a show like this, where we were jumping back and forth from stage to location a lot, most of the time, luckily shooting on location first and then shooting on stage so I can match it. But still, sometimes that was a real challenge and a fun challenge, but definitely something that you have to think about in advance.
It could be interesting if you would quickly explain how that top light really looks, because you hang the rags down from 2 sides so you can light them from the back. So you're not just.
Yeah. So it's almost like creating like a giant light box. So you're basically just emulating what's in nature. So when you're outside, there's light coming from all directions. There's not just light coming from the sky. There's always light coming from the ground. There's lights coming from, bouncing off the ground, bouncing off, maybe there's a building or there's different things that are being bounced off. So you can start with that, and then you can start to bring in your negative and shape it. But I find if it's nighttime and you're trying to do night for day, the best thing is to start with a giant overhead so that you can get that sort of ambience, and then you can work from there and then start lighting.
And do you then really supplement it? Do you push some light on the floor so you get some bounce back?
Sometimes to do light on the floor, other times I'll just set up like, a 360 is a wonderful tool through magic cloth or multiple layers of magic cloth. It really feels to me like a soft sun source. And it gives a little bit of shape to the face as well. So it's not just flat, which I think is something that's really nice to play with.
Mm-hmm. Cool. And do you do colors too? Do you do kind of multiple colors to supplement?
Not so much during the day. Yeah, during the day, I stay pretty clean and true to real daylight. I like it to feel more natural not quite as stylized. Not to say that I won't be doing that on my next job, because it's going to be super stylized. So for this show for sure, and for the other show, Perpetual Grace, that I don't know if we're going to have time to talk about, but I could show one piece from that, because it's a little bit different, but it's the same philosophy of when you're outside, using the most that you can of what's given to you by nature, and not trying to fight it so much. And that's just something I kind of have learned over time, that when I started out, I was always trying to fight it, and take it all away and then redo it. And I've just found that there's so many times that, especially with a lot of our schedules, it's just better to shoot at the right time of day and convince everybody that that's the right thing to do. And I drive my ADs crazy, because I always want to start at 6 a.m. But it's just something that we work out. Sometimes we can, sometimes we can't, but yeah.
Cool. Yeah, let's look at some stuff. You got so many things here.
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
totally
Let's
right.
look.
Yeah.
So this would the next still. This is the next piece of footage, but I guess we could just look at the footage. Might as well, since we're running out of time. So this is this first scene. I call it the barn. We're going to jump ahead. We won't talk about the stage work on Jupiter's Legacy, because we won't have time. But if we go to the actual running footage, Sam, I think in terms of the first clip from Perpetual Grace. So this is a barn, a scene in a barn, and it looks. The thing that I find fascinating about these types of scenes is it looks to the viewer like very natural. Like we just went into a barn. There's probably light coming from the other side that's lighting them, and then you're looking outside. So you can go ahead and play, and then I'll talk. So basically, in this scenario, and it is wintertime, so the sun was pretty low. In order to see outside, we actually had to use 2 giant lights, M90s, bounced into ultra bounce through rags in each scenario, in order to balance, because the outside was about 5 stops over, 6 stops in some case. And then basically to make it feel like it did in this scenario, which is more natural light. So it was using the natural light for the wide shots, with obviously some supplementing through the actual barn doors themselves. I think that was the end of it there. So we can stop that. Now we're not in the barn. But yeah, so it was more, when you get into a situation where you have a beautiful wide shot, and then if you're not prepared, when you go in for a close-up, when you're on location doing exteriors, you can really get stuck where your background is just completely blown out. And then it's like, why are you even there? And in this scenario, there's nowhere to put NDs, which you can do when you have windows, and nets you would see. So that was one of the reasons that I wanted to show that, just to talk about.
Yeah, makes total sense. So when you think about that stuff, you're moving to a barn, you always have in mind, you need the big units should something like that happen, that you go. But in this case, it was really prepped, right?
It was really prepped, yeah. Because I mean, we knew what we were going to be up against, but still on the day, sometimes, you'll set it up and you'll be like, oh, we need another light or another 2 lights. Yeah. So, I'm always, whatever I think with my gaffer is going to be right, I always try to have twice as much ready. And then it's much easier to turn it off and set it up again, especially once the actors are ready to go.
Of course, yeah, so, it has to be fast.
Yeah, especially in television. So, yeah.
Want to go on?
Yeah, I mean, we could. I have a couple other pieces.
Yeah, I mean, there's one thing maybe we should talk about. I think it's great because you've got like these people sitting opposite of each other. One person is wearing glasses, right? And you have those barns. You have those barn doors on the side, and you don't see the reflection because you wouldn't see his face anymore at that point, right?
Right.
So how do you move, the sets around when you're moving into close-ups? You're moving into.
Sure. Well, in that situation, just the way it worked out, we just could close the barn door. So when we turned around, we would just close the door, so he wouldn't get the reflections. And anyway, even regardless, when I would turn around anyway, I would always put up a giant, piece of negative, a T-bone or something in the back behind camera, so you wouldn't get that extra eye light. Yeah. I would just want the eye light from my light.
Yeah. Do you do that a lot with negative film? You work a lot with it?
Pretty much all the time. Yeah. So I'll always try to have 2 12-bys set up so that you can have one behind camera, one over to the side, and then just play with it, moving it in and out as much as possible. And I just find, with all the cameras, like on Jupiter's Legacy, we shot with the Venice to protect for the highlights and protect for the blacks with that camera. When you're outside, you have to play with it a little bit in that respect. But once you get it into that into that wheelhouse, you have so much to play with when you go into post. So
yeah. So basically, you set up your LUT, you make sure when you're done lighting it that your highlights are protected, your blacks are protected.
Yeah.
And then you just kind of figure out your look in between there. Just,
yeah. As long as you have all the sort of mid-tones and shadows are safe and you're in a good range, then you can really have a lot to play with. If your highlights are gone, they're gone.
Yeah.
And if you're too far down on the toe, it's noisy.
Yeah.
So you have to find that sort of happy medium. And it's definitely one of those things that, you know, like, again, I've definitely learned over time to be prepared for, and not to just think that you can just show up and shoot an exterior location without having these tools. So, you know, that's why to me, it's always more of a battle to, you know, if you want to ask for multiple fly swatters or things like that, you know, you might not need them, especially if it's overcast. And then you just, you know, your poor producer sees 6 cranes sitting around that you didn't need, but if you don't have them there, you can also end up having a really difficult day.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. How do you do it for yourself? Because it's very technical to figure out the highlights, you know, not to get unexposed, no overexposure. How do you do that with your creative space to kind of feel that you can let go of that and light? How do you balance that during a shooting day when you're measuring, when you're going into, you know, the right-hand side of the brain there?
I call my DIT my co-DP in a way, because they are, you know, we're on headsets and we're always talking. If I'm on set and he's back at the monitor, I can ask him if the highlights are safe. So I don't have to keep jumping back and forth, and I can actually be on set and look at what I'm lighting and be there and working, as opposed to being in the tent, which I prefer to be on set. I always have a 17-inch monitor with me on set, which is calibrated, and it also has a waveform on it, so I can see if things are clipping. Sometimes when they're clipping a little bit, I can just ask him, are we safe enough? Can I move on? Or if we're not, he'll say, nope, you know, you have to fix it and get it more into the way, you know, that we need to work. So
do you check each shot in the tent, or is it just when you have the flow, you go with it?
it depends. If I have time, yes, of course. Usually I have time to go check it, and I get them as close to me as possible. But if it's in a scenario where you can't be close, I just trust him, and yeah, we can just go ahead and roll. Yeah, and then I'll check the second take. Not the first. I usually never use the first take anyway. So
very good.
So the next, there's one scene. It was just kind of an interesting one to talk about, which is the next Perpetual Grace clip. It's just something that again, when you're in prep, which is so important to me, and I feel so fortunate, because all of these shows that I've been on, and like the one I'm going on to right now, I have 3.5 months of prep. So it gives me so much time to spend with the production designer, with costumes, with my director, everybody involved, and talk about how we can shoot things the best way, the smartest way, to save money for production and also to be fast, so there's enough time. So this was one scenario where when we got to the location, it was this beautiful forest, and we knew that we were going to be facing in one direction in the morning, and then by the time the sun moved, we would be in another direction, and there would be a better background. So yeah, so this is the starts off with the wide shot. So basically we placed this little cabin, so it was backlit because these trees were so beautiful, and then we shot these different, you know, pieces in the morning, and then as the sun came around, we basically flipped like in a different part of the park, and then the production designer built a whole different set for this little girl to pop out of the top of the roof, so that we also had a better background. It was just, you know, a nice way to cheat, to use the available light as opposed to me having to light it. Again, this was a difficult location, and getting lights and getting gear in here, everything had to be in truck, like pickups. So we couldn't bring in big trucks. So it just allowed us to be able to shoot the sequence quickly and efficiently.
That looks gorgeous.
And it still looked good. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Really beautiful.
Yeah, and
it's
I didn't
also
have to use
how
lights.
you allow underexposure if you're shooting in that direction, because it's
Yeah.
so, the image is so strong.
Yeah, and that's, again, you know, something, you know, if you're working with a director who really has faith in you, and they don't always have to see into the eyes on every single shot, you know, when it's important for story, it's great, but also, you know, seeing things like we see them with our eyes is also really, really important to me. Not having everything be lit all the time. Sometimes it doesn't necessarily make sense for the story. So
it makes total sense.
Yeah.
So Beautiful quote to finish.
There we go.
So we
Oh.
could hop into Q&A so
Yeah.
we get to see everybody.
Sure, sure.
Oh, hi. Thank you so much for sharing this. And I'm a freelance DP. And I have a question about the barn scene just mentioned that, because you said you were not using any NDs and the net for that window because there's not actually a window there. And you said you use M90 plus diffusion. So that was for the interiors of the two shot about the lighting
Yeah.
for the.
Yeah, I think I understood. So basically because it's just an open door, we couldn't ND for the balance between the inside to the outside. So instead we would use the M90s for the interior key light on their faces so that we could basically balance the talent to the exterior.
Okay, so basically
That makes
you
sense?
were bringing up the light inside the barn.
Yeah,
that
so it's
correct?
basically to bring up the level inside the barn so that we could then also see outside.
Okay, because it looks super soft in the footage. And do you remember how many NDs you use?
We didn't use, I think, okay, so there's
Oh, I
two
mean for
NDs.
the
This is where-
camera. Mhm.
Oh, for the camera. Oh my
Yes,
gosh. No, I mean, I don't remember that. I wish it's been about 3 years. So I don't
Alright.
remember that, but yeah, no, I mean, in general, I would say, when I'm shooting outside, that was Alexa. So, we're usually using most of the internals on those cameras, but in that situation, because we were also battling, the interior, we were probably mostly wide open, I would think.
Oh, that's cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, no.
Ready? Okay. Hi. So I have a question about if you wanted to shoot exterior with hard light from the sun. I'm wondering if you can share, like, in terms of time of day or environment in external location would be appropriate for that kind of shot. And thank you for your presentation.
We actually had some more images that I was going to be discussing this, but we ran out of time. And the reason that I actually brought up this topic in the first place is because the next show I'm doing is in Africa, and it's going to be in the middle of summer, and I'm going to be dealing with exactly this issue where we're shooting all day. It's going to be lots of toppy, hard light, and because it's very windy there, it's sort of the same issue where you cannot, a lot of the time, control that. So you have to learn how to embrace it. And so we were talking a lot about picking the right time of day. There might be a certain scenario where front light is really beautiful, especially if it's low. I love it when it's low. And then you can use the front light or the side light. When it's super toppy, obviously it's tricky because you end up just getting, kind of an ugly highlight on people. So when you're tighter, obviously you can control it, but when you're in a big wide shot and it's toppy, it's very tricky. So it was one of the things that I originally brought up that I am trying to figure out on my next show, because I am going to have to be shooting during certain times of the day when I probably wouldn't want to be shooting outside. And one of the things that I found with digital that you can do in advance is you can actually, within your LUT that you create, if you know you're going to be in those kinds of situations, you can actually create a LUT that is less contrasty, deals with the highlights, and then again, trust in your post process that you're going to be able to go in and hopefully dig some of that out later after the fact. If you don't have the time or you don't have the resources, if you don't have gigantic amounts of money, you can also sometimes figure out how to do those things later after the fact. But again, if the highlights are gone, the highlights are gone. So I would just say the most important thing to do is to control your highlights and try to fill in the eyes, and then you can kind of play from there. But I'm not afraid of front light. And we were talking about some photographers like from the 70s, like Helmut Newton and people like that who shot everything front lit. And it was beautiful, but it was film. And it's definitely trickier in digital. So again, I'm going to be shooting a lot of tests because it's something, I feel like you've never done anything twice in this business. Every time you do something, it's something new. And we all just, as cinematographers, we test and test and test and figure out a way to make it work. So it's a really good question. And again, it's something that I'm still struggling with all the time. It's really hard and you have to find the balance.
Thank you.
Hi, I'll make it quick. It's two questions real quick. One of them, do you have non-negotiable tools that you do not do day exteriors without? And the other question is, do you have any, doesn't have to be extreme horror story, but pretty much a mistake that you made at some point in your career, whenever it may have been, shooting day exteriors that maybe taught you a huge lesson on shooting day exteriors? So non-negotiable tool that you don't show up on set without for day exteriors, and any horror stories that you're willing to share with us that taught you a bunch, please. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. So I would say, there's never a non-negotiable tool, because there's things that I would always want to have, like, I would, in every location, if it was possible to have fly swatters, it would be great, but there are just locations where you can't get them there. Or, maybe it's a day that I would rather have a crane, so I give up a fly swatter or 6 fly swatters or whatever you would need. But I would say a non-negotiable tool would definitely be to have some type of lighting, so that you can troubleshoot if you have sun and then you don't have sun. I think if you don't have lights, you can really get into trouble. And sometimes, when I was starting off doing smaller shows, that was something that you would definitely have to fight and struggle to convince people that you needed to have pretty much the same amount that you would have to have even when you were on location inside. And then in terms of a nightmare scenario, I think it would just be, when I was younger, not interfacing with my AD, with my assistant director, to make sure that, we were shooting at the right time of day. And then getting there and realizing I hadn't really made the right decision. And so after that, it's like, it's like when you don't wake up for school one day, you never do it again. You set 3 alarms. So from that point on, I just walked around with a compass all the time and like checked it 6 times with 6 other people. And yeah, just because I had read the sun wrong, basically. Yeah. So that was my nightmare scenario.
That is a big one.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, luckily it was an indie movie. So
Okay.
anyway,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So if that's end of the questions, thanks again, Nicole, for doing this.
Yeah, this was
went
great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally.
Thank you.
So we'll hand over to Shane outside in the studio. Is wonderful masterclass in light and grip. So looking forward to hearing all about that.